The old man's hands were still steady. Even at 73 years old, Robert Hayes wiped the grease from his fingers and squinted at the broken-down pickup truck. On the shoulder of Interstate 95, rain hammered the windshield of his own truck as he pulled over behind it. Most people would have driven past. It was nearly midnight, the kind of cold November rain that soaked through everything, but Robert had never been the type to leave someone stranded. He grabbed his toolbox from the back seat and stepped out into the downpour. The disabled truck was a beat-up Ford, at least 15 years old, with rust creeping along the wheel wells. Its hazard lights blinked weakly through the rain. A young man sat inside, phone pressed to his ear. He looked maybe 25, with short cropped hair and the rigid posture of someone who'd spent time in uniform. When he saw Robert approaching, he rolled down the window. "Need help?" Robert called over the sound of the rain. The young man hesitated. His eyes were red, like he'd been crying or hadn't slept in days. "Maybe both. I don't want to trouble you, sir." Tripola said, "They're 2 hours out, 2 hours in this weather. You'll freeze." Robert gestured to the hood. "Let me take a look." The young man studied Robert's face for a moment, then nodded. Something about the old man must have seemed trustworthy. He pulled the hood release. Robert lifted the hood and shone his flashlight into the engine bay. Water dripped from his gray hair into his eyes, but he barely noticed. 40 years as a mechanic before retirement had taught him to diagnose problems by sound and feel. He wiggled a few connections, tested the battery cables. "Your alternator's shot," he said, "and your battery's dead as a doornail." The young man got out of the truck, shoulders slumped. Up close, Robert could see the exhaustion carved into his face. The kid was wearing dress blues under a thin jacket. Military dress uniform. Something formal. "I can't afford a tow right now," the young man said quietly. "Or a new alternator." Before you go further into this story, if you're enjoying it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. Robert studied him for a moment. "Where are you headed?" "Arlington, Virginia. I'm supposed to be there by 0600. The young man checked his watch. His hand was shaking. "I'm already going to be late. Arlington National Cemetery." The young man nodded. He looked away, blinking hard. Robert understood immediately. This wasn't just any trip. This was someone going to bury somebody they loved. "What's your name, son?" Marcus Chen." "Well, Marcus, I'm Robert, and you're not going to be late." He pointed to his own truck. "I've got jumper cables and a spare alternator that might fit, used to keep parts for all kinds of vehicles. Let me see what I can do." Marcus shook his head. "Sir, I can't ask you to. You didn't ask. I'm offering—" Robert was already walking back to his truck. 20 minutes later, Robert was under the hood, working by flashlight. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency despite the cold and wet. Marcus held the light for him, silent except for an occasional direction. "You served?" Marcus asked suddenly. Robert didn't look up from his work. "Marines. 2 tours in Vietnam. Army did for years. Got out last month. What do you do now?" There was a long pause. "I'm a tomb guard at Arlington. One of the sentinels." Robert's hand stopped moving. He looked up at Marcus, really looked at him. The tomb of the unknown soldier. Only the most dedicated soldiers earned that assignment. It was one of the highest honors in the military. "Your dress uniform," Robert said. "You're wearing it because my brother—" Marcus's voice cracked. "He was killed in action 3 weeks ago. Afghanistan. Tomorrow morning, we're laying him to rest at Arlington. I'm supposed to be part of the honor guard." The rain seemed louder suddenly. Robert felt something tighten in his chest. "I was visiting my mom upstate," Marcus continued. "She's not doing well. Couldn't handle the funeral. I stayed with her as long as I could, but I have to be there tomorrow. I have to be there for Danny." Robert nodded slowly. He understood the weight of that duty. The sacred obligation to honor a fallen brother. How old was he? 22. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. It was his first deployment. He'd only been there for months. Robert returned to the alternator, working faster now. He'd buried friends in Vietnam. Young men who'd barely lived. He knew that hollow ache, that guilt of surviving when others didn't. "This alternator's going to work," he said firmly. "You'll make it." 30 minutes later, the engine turned over. It sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. Marcus stared at the dashboard in disbelief as the battery gauge climbed into the green. Robert slammed the hood shut and walked to the driver's window, soaked to the bone. "That should get you there. Drive straight through. Don't shut it off until you arrive." Marcus pulled out his wallet. "Please, let me pay you." "How much do I?" Robert held up his hand. "No charge. Just get to your brother. That's all that matters." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you." "Thank me by honoring him tomorrow." "That's enough." Marcus gripped Robert's hand through the window. His grip was strong, desperate. "I won't forget this. I promise." Robert watched as the taillights disappeared into the rainy night. He stood there for a long moment, rain streaming down his face, thinking about all the young men he'd known who never made it home. Then he climbed back into his truck and drove away. He thought that was the end of it. He had no idea that 3 days later, his phone would ring with a call that would change everything. Robert was in his garage when his phone rang. It was Monday morning, 3 days after he'd helped Marcus on the highway. He'd been organizing his toolbox, trying to replace the alternator he'd given away. The number on the screen showed an Arlington, Virginia area code. Probably a telemarketer, he thought. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Hayes?" "Mr. Robert Hayes." The voice was crisp, official, military. Speaking. "Sir, this is Sergeant Major William Torres, calling from Arlington National Cemetery. I'm trying to reach the Robert Hayes who assisted one of our tomb guards on Interstate 95 last Friday night." Robert's hand tightened on the phone. "That's me. Is Marcus all right?" "Specialist Chen is fine, sir. In fact, he's the reason I'm calling." There was a pause. "Mr. Hayes, did Marcus tell you what happened after you helped him?" "No. I sent him on his way. Told him to get to his brother's funeral. He made it. Arrived at 0530 hours, 30 minutes early. He was able to participate in his brother's service as planned." The sergeant major's voice softened slightly. "What you did for him, sir? I don't think you understand the magnitude of it." Robert shifted uncomfortably. "I just fixed his truck. Anyone would have done the same. Nobody else did, sir. 73 cars passed Marcus that night. He counted. You were the only one who stopped." The words hung in the air. Robert pictured that rainy highway, all those taillights disappearing into the darkness. "Marcus came to my office yesterday," the sergeant major continued. "He told me everything. About his mother, about missing his brother, about sitting on that highway thinking he'd failed Danny one last time. And then you appeared." Robert didn't know what to say. He'd done what felt right. Nothing more. "Sir, we'd like to invite you to Washington. To Arlington? As our guest?" "I appreciate that, but it's not necessary, Mr. Hayes." The sergeant major's voice grew firmer. "This is not just an invitation. The tomb guard has a tradition. When someone shows extraordinary service to one of our sentinels, we honor them. We'd like to honor you with a personal tour of Arlington National Cemetery, led by Marcus himself. And we'd like you to witness the changing of the guard ceremony at the tomb of the unknown soldier." Robert felt his throat tighten. He'd never been to Arlington, though he'd lost friends whose names were engraved there on walls and stones. "When?" he asked quietly. "This Friday, if you're available. We'll arrange everything. Transportation, accommodations, all of it." Robert looked around his small garage. His quiet, simple life. He'd spent 50 years trying to forget the war, trying to bury the memories of friends who never came home, but maybe it was time to stop running. "I'll be there," he said. Friday morning arrived cold and clear. Robert had driven down Thursday night, staying in a hotel just outside Arlington. He'd barely slept. Memories he'd kept locked away for decades kept surfacing. Faces of young Marines, the sound of helicopters, the smell of jungle rain. At 0800 hours, he stood at the visitor's entrance to Arlington National Cemetery. The grounds stretched before him, endless rows of white headstones marching across the hills like silent soldiers. "Mr. Hayes?" Robert turned. Marcus stood there in his full-dress uniform, the one reserved for the tomb guards. The uniform was immaculate, every crease razor-sharp, every button gleaming. But it was Marcus's face that caught Robert's attention. The exhaustion was gone. In its place was something else. Purpose, dignity, strength. Robert extended his hand. Marcus shook it firmly, then did something unexpected. He saluted. Robert, old instincts kicking in, returned the salute. "Thank you for coming, sir," Marcus said. "It means more than you know." They walked together through the cemetery gates. The morning sun slanted through the trees, casting long shadows across the headstones. The air was still, reverent. This was hallowed ground, and Robert felt it in his bones. "Your brother's service," Robert said carefully. "How did it go?" Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. It was perfect. Everything Danny deserved. Full military honors. 21-gun salute. The flag-folding ceremony. He paused. "I was able to be there for him. Because of you." They walked in silence for a while, passing section after section of graves. So many lives. So many stories ended too soon. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said finally. "That night on the highway, I was in a bad place. Really bad. My truck had been acting up for weeks, but I couldn't afford to fix it. I barely had enough money for gas. When it died, I thought..." He stopped walking, facing Robert. "I thought it was a sign. That I was supposed to fail. That I deserved to fail. Why would you think that?" Marcus looked away. "Danny wanted to join the army because of me. I was his hero," he said. "When I became a tomb guard, he was so proud. He enlisted 6 months later." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "If I hadn't joined, if I hadn't made it look so glorious, maybe he'd still be alive." Robert understood that guilt. He'd carried it himself for 50 years. "You didn't pull the trigger that killed your brother," Robert said firmly. "And you didn't plant the bomb or fire the weapon. War did that. The enemy did that. Not you. I know that up here." Marcus tapped his head. "But in here..." He put his hand over his heart. "It's harder to believe," Robert nodded. "It always is." They continued walking. Marcus led him past the Kennedy graves, past the memorial amphitheater, toward the tomb of the unknown soldier. With each step, Robert felt the weight of history pressing down on him. "When you stopped that night," Marcus said, "you gave me more than a working alternator. You gave me hope. You showed me that people still care. That kindness still exists. That maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought." They reached a viewing area overlooking the tomb. The white marble monument gleamed in the morning sun, dignified and eternal. A single sentinel paced back and forth with mechanical precision, guarding the remains of soldiers whose names were known only to God. "I guard that tomb 20 hours a week," Marcus said. "Every step I take, I'm thinking about Danny, about all the soldiers who never came home, about the families who never got closure." He turned to Robert. "You helped me get here that night. You helped me keep my promise to my brother. I don't have the words to thank you properly." Robert stared at the tomb, emotion welling up inside him. "You don't need to thank me, son. We take care of our own. That's what we do," Marcus smiled. But there was something else in his expression. Something Robert couldn't quite read. "There's one more thing," Marcus said. "Something I need to show you." He led Robert away from the tomb, deeper into the cemetery. They walked for 10 minutes. Winding through sections with names Robert recognized from wars. He'd studied Korea, Vietnam, Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan. Finally, Marcus stopped in front of a section of newer graves. The headstones were bright white, the ground around them still settling. "Section 60, Marcus said quietly. "Where we bury casualties from Iraq and Afghanistan." He walked to a specific grave and stood at attention. Robert followed, his heart pounding. The headstone read, "Daniel James Chen, Sergeant, U.S. Army, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, beloved son and brother." "Danny," Marcus said softly, "I want you to meet someone." Robert stood beside him, staring at the stone. 22 years old. Just a kid. Like so many others. "I told him about you," Marcus continued. "At the service, I told him about the stranger who stopped in the rain, who fixed my truck, who made sure I could be here for him. His voice cracked. I told him that there are still good people in the world. People like you. Robert felt tears burning his eyes. He hadn't cried in years, but he couldn't stop them now. I'm sorry, he whispered. To Danny. To Marcus. To all the young men he'd left behind in Vietnam. I'm so sorry. Marcus put his hand on Robert's shoulder. Don't be sorry. Be proud. You served with honor. You survived for a reason. And you're still serving, even now. You proved that on Friday night. They stood together in silence, two soldiers from different generations, united by loss and service and an unexpected act of kindness on a dark highway. But neither of them knew that their story was far from over. In fact, it was about to take a turn that would shock them both. After paying respects at Danny's grave, Marcus led Robert back toward the memorial amphitheater. The morning had turned warmer, and more visitors were beginning to fill the cemetery. Families with flowers, veterans in faded jackets covered with pins, school groups walking in quiet reverence. The changing of the guard ceremony starts in 20 minutes, Marcus said. I've arranged for you to have a special viewing position. But first, there's someone who wants to meet you. Before Robert could ask who, they rounded a corner and nearly walked into a group of men in uniform. All of them wore the distinctive uniform of the tomb guards, their badges gleaming on their chests. Mr. Hayes, Marcus said formally, I'd like you to meet my relief team. One by one, the sentinels shook Robert's hand. They introduced themselves with military precision, but their words were warm, genuine. Specialist Chen told us what you did, said a tall sentinel named Rodriguez. We wanted to thank you personally. You have no idea what it means to us, added another named Patterson. When one of our brothers needs help and someone steps up like you did, that's brotherhood. That's service. Robert felt overwhelmed. I just fixed a truck, Sir Rodriguez said firmly. You saved a brother from missing his brother's funeral. There's no price on that. They talked for a few more minutes, sharing stories about the tomb, about their duties, about the weight of guarding the unknown. Robert listened, fascinated. These young men took their duties so seriously, with such reverence. It reminded him of the Marines he'd served with, that same sense of sacred purpose. Finally, Marcus checked his watch. Time to move, gentlemen, Mr. Hayes, if you'll follow me. They walked to the plaza in front of the tomb of the unknown soldier. A crowd had gathered, held back by respectful barriers. Marcus led Robert past the crowd to a special area reserved for VIPs and distinguished guests. Wait here, Marcus said. The ceremony is about to begin. He disappeared behind the memorial amphitheater. Robert stood alone, watching the current sentinel pace back and forth. 21 steps. Turn. 21 seconds of stillness. Turn. 21 steps. The precision was hypnotic. The dedication absolute. The crowd fell silent as the ceremony began. What? Robert witnessed next, took his breath away. The relief commander emerged, followed by the new sentinel. Every movement was choreographed, rehearsed 1,000 times, until it became muscle memory. The inspection of the rifle. The white gloves checking every inch of the weapon for dust. The formal exchange. And then Robert saw him. Marcus stepped into position as the new sentinel taking the watch. His movements were flawless. His bearing was that of a man who understood the sacred trust he'd been given. He was guarding more than just remains. He was guarding memory, honor, sacrifice. Robert felt tears streaming down his face again. But he didn't care. This was why he'd stopped on that highway. This was why it mattered, because Marcus was standing guard for all of them. For Danny, for the unknown, for every soldier who'd ever worn the uniform and never came home. The ceremony concluded. The crowd dispersed slowly, speaking in hushed tones. Robert remained, watching Marcus pace back and forth. 21 steps, turn. 21 seconds, turn, Mr. Hayes. Robert turned. Sergeant Major Torres stood beside him, the same man who'd called earlier that week. He was older than Robert had expected, probably in his late 50s. with silver hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime in service. "I'm Torres." We spoke on the phone. He extended his hand. Robert shook it. "Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for coming." Torres gestured toward Marcus. "That young man has been through hell. Losing his brother nearly broke him. The fact that he's standing there now, on duty, honoring his oath, ... That's because of you. I think he would have made it regardless. Maybe, maybe not." Torres studied Robert's face. "Tell me something. Why did you stop that night? Most people wouldn't have. It was late raining, dangerous. You didn't know Marcus? He could have been anyone. Why risk it?" Robert thought about the question. He'd been asking himself the same thing. "In Vietnam," he said slowly, "I was pinned down during an ambush. Firefight went bad. I was wounded. Couldn't move. One of my brothers, a Marine named Tommy Sullivan, came back for me, ran through enemy fire, got me out. Saved my life." Paused. "Tommy was killed 2 weeks later in another engagement. Never made it home." Torres waited, silent. "I've spent 50 years wondering why he saved me," Robert continued. "Why he risked his life for mine? What made his life less valuable than mine?" His voice grew thick. "And the only answer I've ever found is that it wasn't about value. It was about duty. About not leaving a brother behind, no matter what. So when you saw Marcus, I saw someone who needed help, and I had the ability to help. It was that simple." Robert looked at Torres. "Tommy didn't leave me behind. I wasn't going to leave Marcus." Torres nodded slowly, understanding passing between them. "Mr. Hayes, there's something else we'd like to do for you, if you're willing." "What's that?" "We'd like to tell your story. Not just about helping Marcus, but about your service. About Tommy Sullivan. About what it means to be a brother in arms." Torres pulled out a small card. "We're working with a veterans organization that shares stories of everyday heroes. Men and women who served, who continued to serve in their communities. We think your story needs to be heard." Robert shook his head. "I'm not a hero. I'm just you're exactly what a hero looks like," Torres interrupted gently. "Heroes don't think they're special. They just do what needs to be done. They show up when others drive past. They stop in the rain. They fix the truck." Robert looked down at the card. It had a website and a phone number for something called the Veterans Legacy Foundation. "Think about it," Torres said. "No pressure. But I believe your story could inspire others. And I think Tommy Sullivan would want his sacrifice to be remembered." Before Robert could respond, someone called Torres away. He excused himself, leaving Robert alone with his thoughts. Robert stood there for another hour watching Marcus's pace. The sun climbed higher. The November chill gave way to mild warmth. Tourists came and went. Children asked their parents questions in whispers. Veterans saluted, and Marcus never wavered. Not once. Finally, Robert's legs began to ache. He was 73 after all, and he'd been standing for too long. He decided to find a bench, maybe sit for a while before heading home. As he walked away from the tomb, he heard someone call his name, Mr. Hayes. "Robert," he turned. An elderly woman was hurrying toward him, moving as fast as her age would allow. She had white hair and wore a simple dress with a cardigan. Her eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been crying. "Are you Robert Hayes?" she asked breathlessly. "The man who helped my son?" Robert's heart skipped. "You're Marcus's mother?" "Yes, Linda Chen." She reached for his hands, gripping them tightly. "I had to come. I had to thank you, ma'am. You didn't need to." "Yes, I did." Her voice shook. "When Marcus called me from the road that night, he was devastated. He thought he'd let Danny down. Let me down. Let everyone down. He was sobbing so hard I could barely understand him." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "And then he called back 30 minutes later. He said an angel had stopped. That's what he called you. An angel." Robert felt his throat closing up. "I'm no angel. I'm just a man who knows what it's like to lose people." "You saved my son," Linda insisted. "Not just his truck. Him. You gave him hope when he'd lost it. You showed him that kindness still exists." She pulled him into a hug. her small frame shaking with emotion. "You let me have both my boys at the funeral? One in the ground, one standing guard. Because of you, I got to say goodbye to Danny with Marcus by my side." Robert hugged her back, this grieving mother who'd lost one son and nearly lost another. They stood there together, two strangers connected by a rainy night and a broken truck and a chain of events neither could have predicted. When they finally separated, Linda wiped her eyes and smiled through her tears. "I want you to have something," she said. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small object wrapped in tissue paper. She placed it in Robert's hand. "Danny wore this in Afghanistan," she said. "It was his good luck charm. Obviously it didn't work for him," her voice caught. "But maybe it'll work for you." Robert unwrapped the tissue. Inside was a small metal cross on a chain. It was worn, scratched, carried through desert heat and danger. "I can't take this," Robert said. "This belongs to your family. You're a family now," Linda said firmly. "You're part of our story, part of Danny's legacy. Please, keep it. Remember him. Remember what you did for us?" Robert closed his fingers around the cross. It was still warm from Linda's hand. "I'll treasure it," he whispered. "I promise." Linda smiled, then glanced at her watch. "I need to go. I'm meeting Marcus for lunch after his shift. But thank you, Robert Hayes. Thank you for being you." She walked away, leaving Robert standing there with Danny's cross in his hand. He looked back at the tomb one more time. Marcus was still there, still pacing, still honoring his duty. And Robert realized something profound. He'd spent 50 years running from his military service, from the memories, from the pain. He'd convinced himself that Vietnam had broken him, that he'd left the best parts of himself in that jungle. But he'd been wrong. The best parts of him had never left. The brotherhood, duty, the refusal to abandon someone in need. Those parts had been with him all along. And on a rainy night on Interstate 95, they'd saved a young man's life and given him hope. Robert put Danny's cross around his neck. It hung heavy against his chest, a reminder of sacrifice and service in the invisible threads that connect all who serve. As he walked toward the cemetery exit, he made a decision. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number on the card Sergeant Major Torres had given him. When someone answered, Robert said 3 words that would change everything. "I'll tell my story." 3 weeks later, Robert sat in a small recording studio in Washington, D.C. A camera was pointed at his face. Lights surrounded him. A young woman with a clipboard and headset was adjusting the microphone clipped to his collar. He'd never been more nervous in his life, not even in Vietnam. "Just relax and tell your story naturally," said the interviewer, a veteran himself named James Mitchell. He had kind eyes and a prosthetic leg. "Iraq War. We're just having a conversation." "Forget the cameras," Robert nodded. But his mouth was dry. The red light came on. "Why don't you start by telling me about the night you met Marcus Chen?" James said gently, and Robert began to talk. He told them about the rain, about seeing the hazard lights, about the decision to stop when 73 other people hadn't. He told them about Marcus's dress uniform, about learning he was a tomb guard, about the brother lying in Section 60. But then James asked him to go deeper. "You mentioned that you served in Vietnam. Tell me about Tommy Sullivan." Robert hadn't expected the question to hit so hard. For a moment he couldn't speak. "Tommy was 19, he finally said. Kid from Boston. Loved the Red Sox. Talked about them constantly, even in the jungle." Robert smiled at the memory. "We were on patrol when we got ambushed. The firefight was chaos. I took shrapnel to my leg, couldn't walk. Everyone was scrambling for cover. I was exposed, sitting duck." He paused, living it again. "Tommy saw me. He was safe behind a fallen tree. All he had to do was stay down. But he didn't. He ran out into the open, bullets flying everywhere, and dragged me to cover. Saved my life. And 2 weeks later, Tommy stepped on a mine. He was dead before the medic could reach him." Robert's voice broke. He was supposed to rotate home in 3 weeks. 3 weeks from seeing his family again, from going to Fenway Park, from living his life. Do you ever wonder why he saved you? Every single day for 50 years. James leaned forward, And did helping Marcus give you an answer? Robert looked directly at the camera, tears streaming down his face. It helped me understand that it's not about deserving to be saved. It's about human connection, about seeing someone in need and refusing to look away. Tommy didn't save me because I was special. He saved me because I was his brother. And Marcus wasn't special because he was a tomb guard. He was a young man who needed help, and I had the ability to help him. So you paid Tommy's sacrifice forward. I tried to honor it. Tommy gave me 50 more years of life. The least I could do was use a few hours of one night to help someone else. The interview continued for 2 more hours. Robert talked about his time as a mechanic, about his quiet life, about the guilt he'd carried. He talked about meeting Marcus at Arlington, about watching him stand guard, about Linda Chen and Danny's cross. When it was over, James turned off the camera and shook Robert's hand. "That was powerful," he said. "Really powerful. This is going to touch a lot of people." Robert wasn't sure he believed him. Who would care about an old mechanic fixing a truck? But James was right. 2 weeks after the interview aired on the Veterans Legacy Foundation website, it had been viewed over 2 million times, then 5 million, then 10 million. News outlets picked it up. Local stations. National networks. Someone turned it into a short film that went viral on social media. Veterans groups shared it. Active duty soldiers shared it. Parents showed it to their children. Robert's phone wouldn't stop ringing. He received letters from across the country, from veterans who'd been inspired to share their own stories, from people who'd started stopping to help stranded motorists, from families who'd lost loved ones in service and found comfort in his words. One letter came from Boston. It was from Tommy Sullivan's younger sister, Patricia. She'd seen the interview and tracked down Robert's address. "I was 8 years old when Tommy died," she wrote. "I barely remember him. But you helped me understand who he was, what kind of man he was. Thank you for honoring my brother's memory and for making his sacrifice mean something." Robert cried when he read it. He wrote back immediately, sharing stories about Tommy that he'd kept locked away for decades. Patricia responded, and they began a correspondence that would last for months. But the biggest surprise came from someone much closer. One evening in early December, Robert's doorbell rang. When he opened the door, Marcus stood there in civilian clothes, smiling. "Surprise," Marcus said. "Hope you don't mind me dropping by, Marcus." "What are you doing here?" "I'm off duty for a few days. Thought I'd drive up and see how you're doing. You've become pretty famous, you know." Robert laughed and invited him in. They sat in Robert's small living room, drinking coffee and talking like old friends. "I saw the interview," Marcus said. "Watched it about 20 times. You told Tommy's story beautifully. It was long overdue. And it started something, Robert. Do you realize what you've created?" Robert shook his head. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed him a website. It was called the Highway Angels Project. It had been started by a group of veterans inspired by Robert's story. The mission was simple: encourage people to stop and help stranded motorists, especially veterans and military families. "There are already 10,000 people signed up," Marcus said. "They're committing to stop when they see someone in need. They're carrying jumper cables and basic tools. They're paying it forward, just like you did." Robert stared at the screen, stunned. "This is because of you," Marcus continued. "You showed people that one small act of kindness can ripple out in ways we can't imagine. You didn't just save me that night. You've inspired thousands of people to be better, to do more, to care." "I just fixed a truck," Robert said, his standard response. Marcus smiled. "You keep saying that, but it was never just about the truck, was it?" Robert met his eyes. "No, it wasn't." They talked late into the night. Marcus shared updates about his mother, who was slowly healing. He talked about his continued service at the tomb, about the pride he felt honoring his brother and all the others who'd fallen. "Danny would have loved this," Marcus said quietly. "He would have been so proud that his death led to something positive, that it inspired people." Before Marcus left the next morning, he gave Robert something. It was a small wooden box, carefully carved. "Open it," Marcus urged. Inside was a brass coin. On one side was the image of the tomb of the unknown soldier. On the other side was an inscription: Sentinel Challenge Coin. Presented to Robert Hayes for service above self. This is only given to people who've earned the respect of the tomb guards, Marcus explained. It's our way of saying, you're one of us. You're a brother. Robert held the coin, feeling its weight. It was more than metal. It was acceptance. Recognition. Brotherhood. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just keep doing what you do. Keep being the person who stops. After Marcus left, Robert sat alone in his living room, holding the coin and Danny's cross. Two pieces of metal that represented so much more than their physical form. He thought about the chain of events. One decision to stop on a rainy night had led to all of this. A young man making his brother's funeral. A family finding closure. An interview that touched millions. A movement of kindness spreading across the country. All because he'd decided not to drive past. The phone rang again. Robert glanced at the caller ID. Another unfamiliar number. He'd been getting calls constantly since the interview aired. Most were well-wishers. Some were media requests. A few were veterans wanting to share their own stories. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. The same instinct that had made him stop on the highway. Mr. Hayes? My name is Colonel Sarah Brennan. I'm calling from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Robert sat up straighter. Yes, ma'am. Sir, I've seen your interview. Very moving. But I'm calling about something specific. We've been working on a program to connect veterans with community resources, and your story gave us an idea. She explained that the VA wanted to create a nationwide network of veteran volunteers who would help other veterans in crisis. Not just with cars, but with housing, job searches, mental health resources, anything a veteran might need. We'd like to name it after you, she said. The Hayes Network. And we'd like you to be the face of the program, to help us recruit volunteers and spread the message. Robert was speechless. I'm just a mechanic, he finally managed. We're a veteran who understands service, who understands that helping others is what we do. Her voice was earnest. Mr. Hayes, we lose 22 veterans a day to suicide. 22. Many of them feel isolated, forgotten, without hope. What you gave Marcus that night was hope. We want to give that to thousands of veterans. Robert thought about Marcus on that highway, thinking he'd failed. Thinking he was alone. He thought about all the veterans who felt the same way right now. This very moment. What would you need from me? He asked. Over the next hour, Colonel Brennan outlined the plan. Robert would do some promotional videos, speak at veteran events, help train volunteers. Nothing too demanding for a 73-year-old man, but enough to give the program credibility and heart. Think about it, she said. Talk it over with your family. We can discuss details next week. After hanging up, Robert realized he didn't have much family to talk it over with. His wife had passed away 8 years ago. His son lived in California and called once a month if Robert was lucky. He had a few friends, but no one close. He'd lived a quiet, solitary life since retiring, but maybe that was about to change. He looked at Danny's cross around his neck, at the Sentinel coin in his hand. Tommy Sullivan had given him 50 years. What had he done with them? He'd been a good mechanic, a decent neighbor. He'd paid his taxes and mowed his lawn and lived a life so unremarkable that it could be summarized in a paragraph. Until that night on the highway, until one decision to stop had unlocked something inside him that had been dormant for 50 years. Purpose. Robert picked up the phone and called. Colonel Brennan back. I'll do it, he said. Whatever you need. I'm in. He could hear the smile in her voice. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. You won't regret this. But as Robert hung up, he wondered if he'd just made a terrible mistake. He was 73 years old. He'd spent half a century trying to forget the military, trying to move past Vietnam, trying to be normal. Now he was diving back into that world, surrounding himself with veterans and their pain and their struggles. Could he handle it? Could he be what they needed? Doubt crept in, cold and familiar. But then his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus. Just heard about the Hayes Network. I'm proud of you, brother. Danny would be too. Robert stared at the message for a long time. Then he texted back, "Thank you. For everything." 3 simple words. But they carried the weight of gratitude and brotherhood and the unbreakable bond between those who serve. Robert stood up and walked to his bedroom. On the dresser was an old photograph he hadn't looked at in years. Him and Tommy Sullivan, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. Vietnam, 1969. 2 young men who had no idea what was coming. He picked up the photo and studied Tommy's face. So young, so alive. "I'm doing this for you," Robert whispered. "For you and Danny and Marcus and all the others. I'm not going to waste the time you gave me anymore." Set the photo back down, but this time he placed it where he'd see it every day. A reminder, a promise. The next morning, Robert's phone rang at 6 a.m. It was a local news station. They wanted to do a story about the Hayes Network. "The VA press release went out this morning," the producer explained. "It's already trending online. Everyone wants to talk to you." By noon, Robert had given 4 interviews. By evening, the story was national news. The hashtag the Hayes Network was trending on social media. Veterans groups were pledging support. Volunteers were signing up by the hundreds. And Robert, the quiet mechanic who just wanted to fix a truck, found himself at the center of a movement. But the real test was still to come. Because in 3 days, Robbo would face something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about forgiveness, healing, and the power of human connection. Something that would bring his journey full circle in a way he never could have imagined. 3 days later. Robert was scheduled to speak at a veterans center in Baltimore. It would be his first public appearance since agreeing to lead the Hayes Network. Colonel Brennan had arranged everything. A small gathering, maybe 50 veterans. Nothing too overwhelming for his first time. Robert had prepared a short speech. He'd practiced it a dozen times in front of his bathroom mirror. But as he drove toward Baltimore, his hands shook on the steering wheel. What if they didn't care? What if his story wasn't enough? What if he couldn't find the right words? He arrived 30 minutes early and sat in his truck in the parking lot, trying to calm his nerves. Through the window, he could see veterans arriving. Some walked with canes. Others were in wheelchairs. Young and old, men and women, all carrying the invisible weight of service. Finally, Robert forced himself to get out of the truck. Inside the community center was warm and crowded. More than 50 people had shown up. Easily, over 100. They filled every chair and lined the walls. When Robert walked in, someone started clapping. Then everyone was clapping. Robert stood frozen as the applause washed over him. These people, these veterans who'd given so much, were applauding him. A young man in an army jacket approached. He couldn't have been more than 25, but his eyes looked ancient. "I saw your interview. It's the reason I'm here tonight. I've been struggling since I got back from Syria. Your story made me think maybe there's still hope." Before Robert could respond, others crowded around, each with their own story, each looking for connection, for understanding, for hope. An older woman, Vietnamese Navy, told him about losing her husband to PTSD-related suicide. "Your story reminded me that the good ones still exist," she said. "That kindness isn't dead." Middle-aged man, Gulf War veteran, explained how he'd been homeless for 2 years. "Someone stopped to help me last week. Bought me a meal. Listened to my story. He said he'd heard about the Hayes Network and wanted to pay it forward. You started this, sir. You're changing lives." Robert felt overwhelmed. These weren't abstract concepts anymore. These were real people, real pain, real hope. Colonel Brennan appeared at his elbow. "Ready?" she asked gently. Robert nodded. Though he wasn't sure he was, he walked to the front of the room and stood behind a small podium. The crowd quieted. 100 pairs of eyes focused on him, waiting. Robert looked down at his prepared speech. The words suddenly seemed hollow, inadequate. He folded the paper and set it aside. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said honestly. A few people laughed. Breaking the tension, "I'm not a hero," he continued. "I'm not a public speaker. I'm just an old man who fixed a truck." He paused. "But that night on the highway, taught me something I'd forgotten. It taught me that we're all connected, that every one of us has the power to change someone's life with a simple act of kindness. He told them about Tommy Sullivan, about carrying guilt for 50 years, about believing he didn't deserve the life Tommy had given him. But meeting Marcus Chen changed my perspective, Robert said. I realized that Tommy didn't save me so I could spend my life feeling guilty. He saved me so I could live, so I could help others, so I could pass forward the gift he gave me. His voice grew stronger. Every person in this room has been through things that most people can't imagine. You've seen things, done things, sacrificed things. And maybe, like me, you've spent years wondering what it was all for, wondering if it mattered. He looked around the room, meeting eyes. It mattered. You matter. And your story isn't over? Whatever brought you here tonight, whatever pain you're carrying, whatever struggles you're facing, you're not alone. We're brothers and sisters. We take care of our own. That's what the Hayes Network is about. Not me. Us. The room was silent. So I'm asking you, Robert continued. If you see someone who needs help, stop. If you know a veteran who's struggling, reach out. If you have a story that might help someone else, share it. Don't wait 50 years like I did. Don't let guilt or shame or fear keep you silent. He touched Danny's cross through his shirt. A 22-year-old soldier named Danny Chen died in Afghanistan. His brother Marcus nearly missed his funeral. But because one person stopped to help, Marcus was able to say goodbye. Because one person cared, a family found closure. Because one person chose kindness over convenience, something beautiful came from something tragic. Robert's voice cracked. Can all be that person. Every single day, we have opportunities to stop, to help, to show up. And I'm asking you to take those opportunities, because you never know when a simple act of kindness will save someone's life. He stepped back from the podium. The applause started slow, then built like thunder. People stood. Some were crying. Others were smiling. A few saluted. Robert felt something shift inside him. This was what he was supposed to do. This was why Tommy had saved him. Not to hide away in a garage for 50 years, but to eventually step forward and help others do the same. After the speech, Robert stayed for 2 hours, talking with veterans one-on-one. He listened to their stories. He offered what comfort he could. He took phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. One conversation stood out. A man approached him near the end of the night. He was maybe 40, with dark circles under his eyes and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. His name was Eric, and he'd served 3 tours in Iraq. I almost didn't come tonight, Eric admitted. I've been... struggling. Really struggling. My wife left. I lost my job. And yesterday, I sat in my car with a bottle of pills, trying to work up the courage to take them all. Robert's chest tightened. But then my phone buzzed with a notification about your speech tonight. And something made me put the pills down. Something made me come here. Eric's eyes filled with tears. I don't know if you believe in signs, but I think maybe Tommy Sullivan sent me that notification. I think maybe Danny Chen wanted me to hear what you had to say. What stopped you? Robert asked quietly. From taking the pills? Your interview. The part where you said Tommy saved you so you could live, not so you could feel guilty. I realized I've been doing the same thing. I survived when friends didn't, and I've been punishing myself for it. But maybe I survived for a reason. Maybe I still have something to do. Robert put his hand on Eric's shoulder. You do. I promise you. You do. Will you help me? Eric's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know how to find my way back, but I want to try. I'll help you, Robert said firmly. We'll help you. That's what we do. He introduced Eric to Colonel Brennan, who immediately connected him with VA resources. She assigned him a caseworker on the spot and scheduled a follow-up appointment for the next day. As Robert watched Eric leave with a bit more hope in his eyes, he understood something profound. This was bigger than him. Bigger than Marcus. Bigger than one broken truck on a rainy highway. This was about creating a network of people who refused to drive past someone in need. Who stopped? Who helped? Who showed up? And it was working. On the drive home, Robert's phone rang. It was Marcus. "I heard your speech went well," Marcus said. "How did you know about it already?" "Someone live-streamed it on Facebook. It's already been shared 10,000 times." Robert couldn't quite process that. "Listen," Marcus continued. "I have something to tell you. I've been accepted into a special program. The VA wants me to work with the Hayes Network, specifically helping veterans transition from active duty. They want me to use my experience with Danny to help others process grief and loss." "Marcus, that's incredible. It's because of you. You showed me that our pain can have purpose, that Danny's death doesn't have to be meaningless." Marcus's voice grew thick with emotion. "I'm going to help people, Robert, just like you helped me." After they hung up, Robert drove in silence, watching the highway lights blur past. He thought about Eric, about to end his life, stopping because of a notification on his phone. He thought about Marcus, turning his grief into purpose. He thought about the hundreds of volunteers signing up for the Hayes Network. And he thought about Tommy Sullivan, 19 years old, running through enemy fire to save a brother. "We're doing it, Tommy," Robert whispered. "We're making it matter." But as Robert pulled into his driveway that night, he had no idea that the next morning would bring a phone call that would shake him to his core. A call that would reveal a truth so unexpected, so profound, that it would rewrite everything he thought he knew about that night in Vietnam. The phone rang at 7 in the morning. Robert had been awake for an hour, drinking coffee and reading through messages from veterans who'd seen his speech. Each message was a reminder that his words had reached someone, touched someone, maybe even saved someone. The caller ID showed a Boston area code. "Hello? Is this Robert Hayes?" The voice was elderly, shaking with age and emotion. "Is this Robert Hayes? Mr. Hayes, my name is Margaret Sullivan. I think you knew my son, Tommy Sullivan." Robert's coffee cup nearly slipped from his hand. He set it down carefully, his heart pounding. "Mrs. Sullivan, I saw your interview about Tommy, about how he saved you." She was crying. "Mr. Hayes, I've waited 56 years to meet the man my son died protecting." Robert couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. "I tried to find you after the war," Margaret continued. "The Marine Corps gave me your name, but you'd moved and I lost track. I looked for years. And then last month, my granddaughter showed me your interview online. She said, 'Grandma, this is the man Tommy saved. Mrs. Sullivan, I." Robert's voice broke. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't find you. I didn't know you were looking." "Don't apologize. Don't you dare apologize." Her voice was fierce, despite the tears. "You lived, Robert. You lived the life Tommy wanted you to have. And now you're honoring him. You're making his sacrifice mean something. Save me. I owe him everything," Margaret said firmly. "You don't owe him anything. He did what any brother would do. What he'd want is exactly what you're doing now, helping others. Being kind, making the world a little better." They talked for an hour. Margaret told him about Tommy's childhood, about his love of baseball, about the way he'd insisted on joining the Marines, even though she'd begged him not to, about the last letter she'd received from him, written 2 days before he died. "He mentioned you in that letter," Margaret said. "He called you his best friend. He said you made him laugh even in the worst moments. He said if anything happened to him, he hoped you'd make it home." Robert was openly sobbing now. "I didn't know. I never knew. Well, now you do. And I want you to know something else." Margaret's voice softened. "I'm proud of you, Robert. Tommy would be so proud. The way you helped that young man, Marcus. The way you're helping all these veterans. You're living a life of service, just like Tommy did. That's the greatest honor you could give him, would you?" Robert could barely get the words out. "Would you like to meet? In person?" There was a long pause. Then Margaret said, "I'm 87 years old, Mr. Hayes. I don't travel well anymore. But if you're ever in Boston, my door is open. I'd very much like to meet you." "I'll come," Robert said immediately. "I'll come as soon as I can." They exchanged information. Margaret gave him her address and phone number. She promised to send him copies of Tommy's letters, including the one where he mentioned Robert. After they hung up, Robert sat in his kitchen, shaking 50-6 years. Tommy's mother had been looking for him for 56 years, and all that time Robert had been hiding, running from his past, convinced he didn't deserve to live the life Tommy had given him. What a waste. But it wasn't too late. He could still make it right. Robert called Colonel Brennan. "I need to take a trip to Boston. As soon as possible. Is everything okay?" He explained about Margaret Sullivan, about the phone call, about finally, after more than half a century, getting the chance to meet the mother of the man who'd saved his life. "Go," Colonel Brennan said immediately. "The Hayes Network can wait. This is important." But then she had an idea. What if we made this part of the Hayes Network launch? Boston has a huge veteran population. We could organize an event while you're there. You could speak, meet with local veterans, and visit Mrs. Sullivan. We could film it, with her permission, and share the story of how kindness connects generations. Robert hesitated. "I don't want to exploit her grief. We won't. But her story, combined with yours, could inspire thousands more people to reach out, to connect with Gold Star families, to bridge the gap between those who served and those who waited at home." Colonel Brennan's voice was gentle. "Think about it. Talk to Mrs. Sullivan. See if she'd be comfortable with it." Robert called Margaret back and explained the idea. To his surprise, she was enthusiastic. "I want people to remember Tommy," she said. "I want them to know what he did. And if our story can help other families connect, other veterans heal, then yes. Absolutely yes." 2 weeks later, Robert stood outside a small house in South Boston. His hands were shaking as he walked up the steps. This felt more terrifying than any combat he'd seen. This was meeting the mother of the man who died in his place. The door opened before he could. Knock. Margaret Sullivan was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, with white hair and eyes that were unmistakably Tommy's eyes. The same bright blue, the same warmth. "Robert," she whispered. Mrs. Sullivan reached up and touched his face, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You have kind eyes." Tommy always trusted people with kind eyes. Then she pulled him into a hug. This tiny woman embracing the man her son had saved. Robert held her carefully, afraid she might break. But there was strength in her grip. The strength of a mother who'd survived the unthinkable and kept going. "Come in," she said. "I have so much to show you." The house was filled with memories. Photos of Tommy covered every surface. His baseball glove sat on a shelf. His Marine Corps flag hung on the wall. Margaret led Robert to the dining room table, where she'd laid out Tommy's letters, his medals, his personal effects returned after his death. "He wrote 43 letters home from Vietnam," Margaret said. "I've read each one 1,000 times here." She handed Robert a letter. "This is the one where he mentions you." Robert's hands shook as he unfolded the yellowed paper. Tommy's handwriting was neat, careful. "Dear Mom," it began, "I made a good friend here. Robert Hayes from Pennsylvania. He fixes our vehicles and keeps us laughing even when things are bad. He reminds me of Dad in some ways. Loyal, steady. The kind of guy you want next to you when things go sideways. If anything happens to me, I hope he makes it home. He's got a good heart." Robert couldn't finish reading. He set the letter down, his vision blurred with tears. "He loved you," Margaret said simply, "in the way soldiers love each other, like brothers." They spent hours together that afternoon. Margaret told stories about Tommy's childhood. Robert shared memories from Vietnam, the good ones, the ones that made Margaret laugh. Talked about Fenway Park constantly, Robert said. Used to say the Red Sox would win the World Series before he turned 30. We all teased him about it. Margaret smiled. They finally won in 2004. 35 years too late for Tommy, but I went to the parade. I brought his photo. I felt like he was there with me. He was, Robert said. I'm sure he was. That evening, the Hayes Network event was held at a Veterans Hall in downtown Boston. Over 300 people attended. The room was packed with veterans, active duty service members, and Gold Star families. Robert spoke about Tommy, about Marcus, about the power of one moment of kindness to ripple across decades. But the most powerful moment came when Margaret took the microphone. "I'm 87 years old," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "I've lived a long life. But the best day of that life was when I was 18 and gave birth to my son Tommy. And the worst day was when 2 Marines knocked on my door to tell me he was gone."
Ow.
The room was completely silent. For 56 years, I wondered about the man Tommy saved. I wondered if he was happy, if he had a family, if he'd made something good out of the life my son gave him. She looked directly at Robert. "And now I know. Robert Hayes has lived a life of quiet service. He's helped people. He's been kind. He's made the world better. And now, in his golden years, he's still serving, still helping, still honoring my son's sacrifice." She paused, tears streaming down her face. If you're here tonight, you're connected to service in some way. Maybe you served. Maybe someone you love served. Maybe you've lost someone. And if you're struggling with that, if you're carrying guilt or grief or pain, I want you to know something. Your life matters. Your story matters. What you do with the time you're given matters. She looked around the room. Tommy didn't save Robert so he could spend 50 years feeling guilty. He saved him so he could live. And that's what I'm asking all of you to do. Live. Help each other. Be kind. Create ripples of goodness that spread far beyond what you can see. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Afterward, dozens of people lined up to meet Margaret and Robert. Gold Star mothers embraced Margaret, sharing their own pain and finding comfort in hers. Veterans shook Robert's hand, many thanking him for giving them permission to stop feeling guilty for surviving. One young woman, an Army veteran, approached Margaret hesitantly. "Mrs. Sullivan, I lost my best friend in Iraq. I was driving the vehicle when we hit an IED. She died. I survived, and I've hated myself for it every day since." Margaret took both of the woman's hands in hers. "Your friend didn't die so you could hate yourself. She died so you could live. Honor her by living well, by being kind, by making your life count." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "Don't waste your survivor's guilt on self-destruction. Transform it into purpose." The young woman broke down, sobbing. Margaret held her. This woman who'd spent 5 decades learning how to carry grief with grace. Later that night, Robert drove Margaret home. They sat in his truck outside her house, neither wanting the evening to end. "Thank you," Robert said, "for finding me, for forgiving me." "There was nothing to forgive," Margaret said, "but you're welcome. And thank you for honoring Tommy, for making his life and death mean something. I'll keep doing it. For as long as I can," Margaret smiled. "I know you will." She opened the door, then paused. "Robert, one more thing. Tommy had a son, my grandson. He's in the Marines right now, deployed overseas. When he comes home, I'd like you to meet him. I think Tommy would want that. I'd be honored." Robert watched as Margaret walked slowly up her steps and disappeared into her house. Then he sat there for a long time, watching the lights of Boston twinkle in the distance. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Saw the live stream from Boston. You and Mrs. Sullivan were incredible. The Hayes Network just hit 50,000 volunteers. You're changing the world, brother," Robert texted back. "We're changing it together." As he drove back to his hotel, Robert thought about the impossible chain of events that had led to this moment. A rainy night on a highway. A broken truck. A young man in dress blues. A funeral at Arlington. An interview that went viral. A nationwide network of kindness. And finally, closure with the family of the man who'd saved his life 56 years ago. It was too perfect to be coincidence. Robert touched Danny's cross, still hanging around his neck. He thought about Tommy and Danny and Marcus and all the others who'd served and sacrificed. And he understood. This was the reason. This was why Tommy had saved him. Not just so Robert could live, but so that decades later he could help Marcus, who would inspire millions, who would help countless veterans find hope and purpose. Tommy's sacrifice hadn't saved just one life that day in Vietnam. It had saved thousands. tens of thousands, and the ripples were still spreading. Robert pulled over to the side of the road, tears blurring his vision. He looked up at the night sky, at the stars that Tommy and Danny and all the fallen soldiers were now part of. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for trusting me with this life. I promise I won't waste another minute of it." And he didn't. Robert Hayes spent the next 10 years as the face and heart of the Hayes Network. He spoke at hundreds of events. He met with thousands of veterans. He connected Gold Star families with each other and with the brothers and sisters of their loved ones. He visited Margaret Sullivan 4 times a year until she passed away peacefully at age 93. Her last words to Robert were, "Tell Tommy I'll see him soon." He met Tommy's grandson, a Marine captain, and they became close friends. He watched as Marcus married, had children, and eventually retired from the Tomb Guards to run the Hayes Network full-time. He saw Eric, the veteran who'd almost taken his own life, go on to become a counselor helping other veterans with PTSD, and every year on the anniversary of that rainy night on Interstate 95, Robert drove to that exact spot on the highway. He'd pull over, turn on his hazard lights, and spend a few minutes in silence, remembering the moment that changed everything, honoring the broken truck that became a bridge between pain and purpose, thanking God, or fate, or Tommy Sullivan's guardian angel for giving him the wisdom to stop. Robert Hayes passed away at age 83, exactly 10 years after helping Marcus Chin. He died peacefully in his sleep. Tommy's photo on his nightstand and Danny's cross around his neck. His funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery, an honor reserved for those who've served with exceptional distinction. Marcus Chen, now in his 30s and head of the Hayes Network, delivered the eulogy. "Robert Hayes was a simple man who did a simple thing," Marcus said. "He stopped to help someone in need. But that simple act created a tidal wave of kindness that's still spreading today." The Hayes Network has helped over 2 million veterans in the past decade. 2 million people found hope because one old man refused to drive past a broken truck. Robert spent 50 years thinking he didn't deserve the life Tommy Sullivan gave him. But in the last 10 years, he more than earned it. He transformed his survivor's guilt into a legacy of service that will outlive all of us. At the conclusion of the funeral, as Robert's casket was lowered into the ground in Section 60, not far from Danny Chen's grave, something remarkable happened. 21 Tomb Guards, current and former, formed an honor guard. They'd all volunteered to be there. Each one had been touched by Robert's story, by his kindness, by his example. Marcus stood at attention, tears streaming down his face, as taps played across the cemetery. And as the last note faded into silence, he whispered words only Robert's spirit could hear. "Rest easy, brother. Your watch is over. We'll take it from here." The Hayes Network continues to this day. It has chapters in all 50 states and has helped over 5 million veterans and counting. Every volunteer carries a card in their wallet. On one side is Robert's photo. On the other side is a simple message: stop, help, show up. You never know when a small act of kindness will change someone's life forever. And somewhere on a rainy highway, in a cemetery at Arlington, in a small house in Boston, 3 spirits smile. Tommy Sullivan, who saved a life in Vietnam. Danny Chen, who inspired a movement in death. And Robert Hayes, who proved that one person, one moment, one decision to stop can change the entire world. Because kindness doesn't die. It multiplies. And it never, ever stops rippling forward.